If you've ever looked at a range of different stock market and investment platforms, you're probably confused about some of those interesting features that make them unique. Today, I've got 5 of my standout features that I personally absolutely love about the Koyfin platform. So let's get into it. We have the screener. Now, I know a lot of platforms have different screeners, but this is a fantastically easy to use screener that has a couple of really useful features. First of all, let's just add a new screener. Now, when we want to add a new screener, we can skip this, but it's got some presets here. And I think this is also really nice for a new user because it shows us the type of elements that we might want to consider or features that we might want to consider within the screener. And this shows us quite a number of different types of styles of investing and things that we might be looking for. So we could be looking, for example, global real estate companies with a 10-year dividend growth over 10%. So in other words, if you're a dividend growth investor with a focus on real estate and a global search, this could be good for you. Now, for example, if you're looking for more of a company perhaps that's growing quickly, so you could be looking for US stocks with positive EPS and sales revisions. So here, for example, they're constantly beating those analyst expectations. You could be looking for those with the over 20% forward 2-year sales and EPS growth. So what we can do is we can simply select some of these. We could select, for example, the global real estate companies. And it also shows us up here the universe criteria as well as filter criteria. So we can also begin to modify the criteria, but we could also sort by these columns. So if I'm looking for the lowest of these growth areas, dividend per share, compound annual growth, and just looking down here as well, are there any that we recognize? Well, Granger PLC, for example, in Europe, Arbor Realty Trust, for example, with a 12.88% in a mortgage real estate. So there's certainly some names here. This certainly seems to be working the way I'd expect it to work. I can then go and modify criteria. I could select, for example, take off these regions, for example, if I just wanted to focus on Canada and the United States. It's going to then also update here and it's going to show me how many companies fulfill each of these criteria as we go down. Primary security industry, I might, for example, want equity real estate, but I might want to take off mortgage real estate trusts, and that's going to substantially drop it down. So at the moment, I've got real estate management and development. I might want to take that down as well. I might want to just stick with equity real estate companies, and it's not going to have anything. And so I can also type in real here, and I can very quickly just find these elements that I'm looking for. So if I'm looking for mortgage real estate companies, I can save and apply. Maybe I'm 10%, maybe is a bit ambitious. Maybe I'm just looking for a 5% increase here. And again, 4 matches. Now I might even drop this down just to 2% and just see how that goes. I could then also just again pop up here to real estate, click on equity as well, market cap. I could also add another criteria here, a dividend yield over 5%. And that doesn't screen anything out. And in fact, even when I added it in, it gave me the lower level there. So I could very quickly then begin to add regions and some of these criteria. So here, for example, I am looking over Europe, United States, and Canada. I'm looking for a current yield of over 10% with a strong track record here of compound annual growth rate of dividend per share in a reasonable sized company. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a screen name. So this is not global, this is USA, EU. So very broadly, that's what it is. That's quite a big, long name. And obviously it's not going to display particularly well here. Now, that doesn't show me everything I want to see here either on the screener. So I can also add a new column. So I can add yield, I can add the dividend yield, last 12 months, for example. I might also be interested in. Now, I can also then begin to look at these figures here. I can sort by the actual starting dividend yield. We've got some very high current starting dividend yield with 10-year coverage here. Now, of course, from here as well, I can begin to click over into each of these investment types, and I can also begin to see how effectively whether or not I'd like to invest in any of these in particular. Now, the market scatter diagram is one of my favorite features here. So what I can do is I can, for example, select a major index, or could even take an ETF. So as a dividend investor, I do enjoy looking, for example, at the SCHD. And here I can put a scatter index on. I've got market capitalization by the EV to sales as a measure of the valuation of a company. But of course, I can change these elements as well. I can also here, for example, very quickly hover over a particular company and get a sense of what's going on there in terms of the price chart. I can even click on that company and it's going to take me into the snapshots for that company where I can begin to explore that company in more depth and more detail. Now back to the market scatter. Again, as I said, I can begin to adjust this to perhaps other features that might be relevant to me as an investor. So here, for example, dividend payout ratio last 12 months compared to the current dividend yield. Now we can also begin to see here as well in SCHD, it's got a lot of companies down in this sort of 2% to 6% dividend yield range, but it's also got a couple of companies up here with much higher dividend yields with some somewhat, we can see here, for example, on the axis, somewhat elevated payout ratios, which is a little bit concerning. Now, for example, this company, Clearway Energy, being a utilities company, the payout metric being used here doesn't necessarily make as much sense, but we can very quickly get a sense here as well of what's going on. Now, maybe payout ratio is not what I want. So here, for example, I might be looking at dividend yield and I might be looking for a strong performer out of the SCHD category. I can see here and get a sense I probably want to be investing up in this corner here, which is empty, where there's a high dividend yield and also a very high estimated compound annual growth rate for the dividends per share. But I can, for example, get a sense that there are some of these companies here which are also paying a high starting yield and also might be above, for example, a 10% dividend per share annual compound annual growth rate. We have the overall market perspective. This is a very busy screen, but it gives us a feel for what's been going on. There's a little bit of a market news panel up here. I can very quickly scroll down. I can see what's going on here. I can also very quickly have a look at some of those major indices and I can visually see how everything's changing. And I can change also the time frame so I can get a sense of extreme long-term performance, for example, as well as much shorter-term performance. Now, I might not be interested so much in equity indices. I might keep I'll keep the S&P 500 on there, but I can also begin to scroll through, for example, equity sectors. And again, this gives us quite a busy screen. I can either select on here. Now, obviously here it's got the equity sector abbreviation there for the actual ETF, but here it has the actual name. So I can hover over one of these and I can very quickly scroll through these and I can see how each of these sectors has been trading over the last year. So I've got a very fast, quick, easy way to visually understand the performance of all of the different sectors. I can also begin to get a sense of the global yields. I can also look at fixed income. I can begin to look at the commodity prices or global markets. And of course, all of these elements I can pop out and I can begin to get a much deeper, much stronger sense as well from the overall market panel. It allows me to very quickly scroll through, dive in, go deep and find out a lot more about what's going on. Good fit for you. There is a link in the description down below. This is an affiliate link. I get a small commission, but you, my friends, also get a nice discount, allowing you to try out this fantastic platform at a great price. All right. Now, in the market dashboards is one that I really do appreciate, which is this factor analysis. So I've got a video with a link down below with a few more details on what factor analysis is and why you should care about this. But put simply, these features or factors or ways of describing particular stocks that lead to market outperformance. And so here we can see, for example, growth over the last 10 years has been a strong grower, but value stocks have not done particularly well. And this is all relative to the S&P 500. So growth outperforms and all these other factors essentially have underperformed the S&P 500. Now, of course, I can also, because it's Koyfin, I can also go back and I can also check timeframes as well. So over the last 1 year, for example, growth here has been a stellar outperformer and these other factors have underperformed. So it gives me a very quick way of quickly assessing and evaluating these different factors. And it also has qualitative factors here, as well as size and value combinations, which I also do like a lot. So, for example, I invest a lot in small cap value, and I might also be looking for, say, large cap value. And so I can select these and I can begin to get a sense of how they have changed and how they correlated or how they are performing over time as well. You might be wondering why I care about global yields. I am a dividend investor. And so there is a huge impact here on the yields offered by treasuries and government issued debt compared to what I can get as a dividend investor from a private or corporate company. In here, for example, I can also begin to get a sense of how in different markets these yields are changing. And I can also begin to see in the larger markets as well. For example, I can begin to get a sense of how in the US the 2-year versus the 10-year is looking. I can also then select a range of other years here and I can get a sense of how everything is changing. It's also got a global yield matrix down, another absolutely critical dashboard for me as I begin to look at general what's happening in the world overviews is the World Economic Dashboard. Now, this has, for example, overall GDP, quarter-on-quarter growth in GDP, annual year-on-year growth, and perhaps I think critically at the moment as well, elements such as the Consumer Price Index. So a measure of inflation, but it's also got, for example, retail sales. So I can begin to see where these markets are booming, such as in Turkey or Russia, as well as industrial production, policy rates, 10-year yields. And so I can begin to get a very quick sense also on joblessness rate of what's going on where and what the wider macroeconomic environment looks and how that might affect some of the companies that I choose to invest in. So what do you think? Is this a good platform? Does it fit your needs? Is there anything else about this platform that you'd like to know about? Let me know in the comments down below and I'll